Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm just making sure that everything is as it should be. Make sure we catch our replay here. And welcome to our live Q&A session. If this is the first time you're joining us, my name is Brianna McWilliam, and I help adults struggling with insecure attachment styles find those soul-shaking and secure partnerships that they want. And I do this primarily through a psycho-spiritual approach, which I call soul-centered security, using creative arts therapies approaches and somatic healing practices. So for today here in our discussion, I'm going to address the questions that were submitted in advance. And for those of you that are not familiar, inside your student dashboard, there's a module called Live Events and Replays. The links to submit your questions are in there. It's also in the introductory section of every course that I sell. So if you want to submit your questions in advance, that typically bumps it to the top of my list. And I'm just going to make Bezam our co-host here. Bezam is my helper. And if you have any questions or technical issues as I'm going along, you please feel free to message her and she can help you as Okay, we got a bunch of questions here today, and actually, I would like to offer kind of a guided practice in today's activities. So, we have about, really, it's three questions, but I'm going to split the last question into two parts. And the first part will be a little bit of discussion, and the second part is going to be a guided visualization activity. So I do encourage you to find a quiet spot if you would like to participate, for today, or you can just watch it and then participate on the replay. Okay, so a few questions that I have scheduled for us to tackle today. Why would someone choose to stay in a bad relationship over a healthy one? How can I reconnect with an avoidant ex without getting hurt again? What if your partner doesn't reciprocate how you're feeling as an avoidant? How long until the relationship falls apart? Okay. So I'm going to dive into these questions as kind of structuring our discussion, but as questions, thoughts, comments, reflections come up, please feel invited to type them into the chat or into the comments, and I will take moments of rest and try to address them as we go through. All right, so I'm just going to pull up our first one, my notes here. Okay, so our first question, why would someone choose to stay in a bad relationship over staying in a healthy one? Okay. So thank you to our inquirer for this question. I don't know the specific situation, but in posting this question, we can imagine a circumstance where one of two things is going on. First, we are the one who is giving up a healthy scenario for an unhealthy, perhaps familiar one, or we are the one providing a safe and healthy relationship container, but our partner has left us to return to what we perceive to be a toxic or unhealthy situation. So, on both sides of the fence, there can be feelings of confusion, rejection, self-doubt, and even shame. And usually that sounds like painful thoughts like, what's wrong with me that I couldn't hold their attention? Or was I not enough? Or maybe I was too much. Or why do I keep going back to what I know is going to hurt me? Right? But when we can acquire greater awareness, then we can start to soften those stories. And we can start to see patterns like this, not as proof of our worthiness or our unworthiness, but rather as invitations to explore what our nervous system and our own emotional history may have been trained into calling love, right? Okay, so to dig into this, there are really three concepts that I want to explore with you today. The first is that the nervous system chooses familiarity over fulfillment until you teach it to do something else, right? Which means this behavior is not always a rational choice. The decision often stems from unconscious nervous system responses responding to childhood conditioning. The second thing is that let's call it a trauma bond. These trauma bonds can masquerade as a kind of destiny, right? So, in other words, the bad relationship might feel more familiar, even if it feels painful. And thirdly, healthy love can feel unsafe if someone hasn't done the work to integrate themselves internally. Because receiving healthy love requires a degree of internal readiness. And without that, the relationship can feel threatening instead of safe, right? Because what defines a safe, healthy relationship? Typically, vulnerability, emotional honesty, authenticity, the sharing of thoughts and ideas, right? If that was punished or there were negative consequences for that in your childhood or in your conditioning, then that's going to feel really unsafe when you encounter it, even if it's supposed to be safe, right? So in this segment, I kind of want to break these down. So the first thing, the nervous system chooses the familiar over what's fulfilling. So when we have grown up around an unstable kind of love, and that means emotional unavailability, inconsistency, or even emotional manipulation, it is natural for our nervous systems to equate some degree of instability with intimacy, some degree of chaos, dismissiveness with what love must be. And that's because it's just what it looked like when we were young, and our brains and our limbic brain and our nervous system just kind of etches that onto our cell memory, not with any kind of interpretation. Oh, that's just what it is. And so the body adapts to it. And so when we have a healthy or stable relationship show up, it doesn't always feel like love to us. It feels foreign. Maybe it feels boring. I hear that a lot. And sometimes even unsafe. And so that means if someone isn't used to a kind of stable or calm connection, they might feel more chemistry with kind of a chaotic dynamic. And it's not because the healthy person did something wrong, it's just because their nervous system hasn't caught up with the kind of love that they really want. And so that becomes a kind of pattern repetition. But remember, these patterns evolved to be protective, right? The dysfunction that we are referring to now was, in fact, the most functional way to be in a dysfunctional environment growing up. So the body's just trying to avoid vulnerability, being overexposed, or even being fully present by retreating into what is known and understood, right? To what is habitual. So, in order to change that, we have to acknowledge my second point, which is that sometimes these trauma bonds feel like destiny, right? And what might be the deeper layer of meaning and understanding that we can take away from these relationships? So, if you have ever felt magnetized to someone who treated you poorly, or you notice that you keep returning to a partner that hurts you, or this person maybe keeps returning to a partner that hurts them, someone you want to be with, right? It's not about weakness, right? It's usually about this kind of unfinished emotional business. And so this bad relationship that someone might be returning or retreating to probably mirrors an early wound. And so there's an unconscious hope that maybe this time I'll finally get it right and I'll finally get the love that I never received. And so there's this quality of it being like really urgent, maybe fated, feeling like home, meant to be. And I really believe that you could make the argument that it is fated on some level because it is going to challenge you on a soul level to confront any negative stories coming up in the wake of this experience. Stories that are pinching you off from the love of your own spirit and maybe even the God of your understanding. And so the nervous system and your body's neurochemistry starts acting as kind of like a radio dial for that spiritual lesson, reenacting the past to somehow change the ending, reliving in order to revise that old wound. And so we might consider this to be an opportunity for our ego, our waking personality, to confront our conditioned projections and illusions about our worthiness, about love, about the capacity to give and receive love, about the availability of love in the world, and to evolve those things into a higher state of consciousness. And certainly it is a kind of love that we are experiencing. People will say, well, trauma bonds aren't real love. Sure they are. Sure they are. It's a love that is showing you where you're not letting a bigger kind of transcendent love to come in. It's pointing you in a direction, and we just have to be willing to follow it. So if someone turned away from you and they went back to a hurtful dynamic, perhaps more than looking for love, they were looking for some kind of redemption from their own past. And that's a path that more often than not, they will have to navigate for themselves from the inside out, right? Now, the third point I want to make is that if we are to relax into a healthy, safe love, then that requires a degree of readiness, right? So maybe on a deeper level, emotionally, spiritually, and developmentally, your readiness for a more expansive kind of love, a deeper type of intimacy, just outpaced theirs. So what once felt like a potential match may now feel off. Not because you did something wrong or they did something wrong, but because you grew and you're ready for something more, something deeper. And receiving that kind of healthy love that you want, requires a level of presence and vulnerability that not everybody has access to yet. It's just not where they are on their path in this moment. So instead of asking, why did my partner choose them over me? We might try asking, are they ready to receive the kind of love that I am ready to give? Because sometimes it's not about fixing anything, it's about recognizing that their capacity just does not meet your clarity. So let me know in the chat here or in the comments below if that question resonates with you. Does their capacity meet your clarity? Is that something that you've ever struggled with? Now, if you're interested in going deeper into the spiritual way of looking at this and aspects of these things, my course, Soul Attachments 101, is a good fit for that. In that course, we go a lot deeper into the intersections between biological attachment and spiritual and psychological attachment, and we do it through the framework of a 10 chakra healing system, creative arts therapies approaches, somatic guided visualizations, and EFT tapping. If you've already purchased the course, then I would direct you to the lesson on the soul star chakra, where we talk about the different types of soulmate relationships and the related lessons that they might be here to teach us. So let's wrap up this segment. Altogether, if you feel like you have been stuck wondering why did they pick this pain over peace, then this is an invitation for you to let go of negative stories and let the universe do its job by protecting you through rejecting you, right? It's not about not being enough. It's not about being too much or too available. It's really about their inner world still seeking after what is familiar and needing to go on that inward journey of healing before they can really receive the kind of love that you are willing and wanting to give, right? The kind of love that you are ready for. And so here's what I want you to hear, that even if they didn't choose you, you still get to choose you. And the universe has chosen you. And they've removed anything and anyone that interferes with that choice for you to have the kind of love that you want, where you don't have to be questioning, why did they pick them over me? Right? Instead, you say, thank you, God, for removing that obstacle from my path, so that now I can welcome with arms wide open the massive flow of love and reciprocation that I'm asking for. And even if they walk away, you still get to walk forward in your own integrity, building your own self-trust, and keeping your sense of wholeness intact. Because most of us, we're not just craving to be chosen, it's about being met in an equal partnership. And believe me, that is not too much to ask for. So, great question. Just want to acknowledge our chat here. How is any of this landing with you? Is this making sense? Can you connect to our inquirer's question here? Worrying over feeling like, why am I not being chosen when I'm clearly the healthier choice? It's a hard quandary to have to deal with. Okay. So we had another question here. So how do I reconnect with an avoidant ex without getting hurt again or stepping on their defenses? Okay. So this question came from a member of our online community, and there's a little bit more detail I want to provide. I recently reconnected with an ex that I have loved for years. He's shown more consistent communication than ever, but I know he has an avoidant attachment style and a fear of commitment. How can I approach the topic of dating again without triggering his defenses? And how can I tell if he genuinely cares or is just keeping me around? Okay. So let me know in the comments or in the chat how many people have ever struggled with that. An ex wants to come back and you're trying to kind of navigate that situation with a little bit of tenderness and maybe a little bit of apprehension, right? Let me know. So, when you've held a torch for someone and they come back, and I think this is probably particularly true if it's been after years of what ifs or maybes or reconciliations and then breaking up again, it can stir up a lot of emotions. Things like hope, nostalgia, longing. I like to call that attachment hunger, right? And when that person starts showing more effort than they did the first time around, it's natural for us to start wondering, wow, maybe finally this is really our time. But it can get a little bit tricky, especially if historically this partner had an avoidant attachment style, because now you're not just navigating your own emotions, but you're likely to be trying to navigate their fear of intimacy as well. So there are really four important points that I want to explore in this segment. And the first is what consistent communication does and does not mean with an avoidant ex, how to approach the conversation about dating again using soft strategies in communication, how to tell the difference between real emotional investment and breadcrumbing behavior, and then how to stop tiptoeing around triggers and get comfortable with uncomfortable feelings. Okay. So if you have ever felt torn between excitement and caution after an ex reappears, especially one that you feel like you never quite got over, the goal of this segment is to give you the insight that you need to stay grounded, to be able to read the signals with greater clarity, and to stop tiptoeing around them. Okay. So let's dive into this. So the first point I want to make, looking at what is avoidant communication and what does it mean and what does it not mean? Right? What consistent communication does and does not mean with an avoidant ex. So, avoidantly attached individuals, they tend to fear emotional closeness, and it's not because they don't care, okay? But it's because closeness historically typically meant pressure, some kind of loss of self or autonomy, maybe failed expectations, and some kind of rejection or negative consequence. So when we have a partner that is avoidant showing up again more consistently, that is not nothing, right? That's not nothing. And it could be their way of signaling interest in the only way that they know how, right? Sort of incrementally, slowly, and from a distance, right? Kind of test the waters. But consistency isn't always the same thing as emotional availability. So maybe the consistency has gone up, but the emotional availability is still hanging out down here, right? So you want to ask yourself, is the communication consistent and meaningful and intimate? Am I learning more about this person? Are we sharing more together? Are they inviting me into their spaces, right? Are they asking to be invited into my spaces? Do they include you in their life and their decision making? Are they making space for connection on a deeper level? Or is it just that they're dropping casual text messages in order to keep that door open? So, those distinctions matter because if you are holding on to a hope of reconnection, it really has to rest on more than just showing up more often. You want it to rest on mutual emotional growth and a capacity to show up in increasingly meaningful ways. Okay. Otherwise, you're going to wind up back at the same place you were the first time. Now, the second point, how do we bring up the idea of dating again without triggering his defenses or scaring him off? Okay. So when someone is avoidant, it's true, direct emotional conversations can sometimes feel threatening. They're very sensitive to emotional content and material. But that doesn't mean that you can't talk to them about what you want or what you're feeling. It just means that you have to be tactful. So when you approach a conversation about dating again, I recommend using what's called a soft strategy in communication. And you're just more likely to get a substantial response, and it's just more likely to land better. So, soft strategies are communication strategies that focus on expressing appreciation, respect for your partner's autonomy, and offering choices. So, for example, instead of saying something like, okay, what's the deal? Are we dating or what? You might say something like, I've really enjoyed reconnecting and I appreciate how you have shown up more consistently in our communication. That's really important to me. And I was wondering, maybe this could evolve into something deeper. How would that land with you? So it's not a foregone conclusion. It's an observation, it's appreciation, it's expressing curiosity and inviting them to be part of that evolving discussion. Okay. It's an invitation. And we're respecting your feelings while leaving them enough space to respond honestly and move towards you. Now, if a question like that sends them running for the hills or results in a vague reply, that's telling you something too, because no response is a response, and indecision is a decision, and you cannot tiptoe around this person's triggers. If this person gets skittish, that means that his fears are outweighing his feelings, and you don't want to strategize your way out of facing the truth of that situation, right? So, for those of you that are unfamiliar, if you want to learn more about soft strategies, I recommend checking out my course, The Courageous Communicator, where we delve a lot more deeply into the topic of attachment-informed communication. And we also talk about safe strategies, which are for our anxious and disorganized or fearful avoidant partners. And for those of you that are already in the course, we talk a lot more about this in lessons 4 and 5. So make sure you log into your dashboard. Okay. So our third point, how to know if he genuinely cares or is just breadcrumbing. So how to know if he's really emotionally invested or keeping you in his orbit? Well, genuine care is going to look like following through in action on what he says he'll do, expressing curiosity about your life and your well-being, making the time and space for connective and interactive activities that build intimacy, and demonstrating small acts of thoughtfulness and consideration that show that he's paying attention. Now, compare that to breadcrumbing behavior, on the other hand, which looks like inconsistent effort, maybe flirty or nostalgic messages without any real solid plans to move forward. It could be inviting you to do things with them, but then showing no real interest in your life and your activities. The conversations could remain on a surface level or disappearing whenever you ask a question that might be a little deeper or more intimate. So if it feels like the progression is going in a loop, then you want to pay attention to that, right? And you want to check in with, well, how is my growth going? And not just theirs. Because a person can circle back into your life because you feel safe and familiar. Maybe they even feel like they have unfinished business with you, but that doesn't mean that they are actually ready to meet you on the same level, right? Okay. So the last point I want to make here, how to stop tiptoeing around their triggers, which means getting comfortable with uncomfortable feelings, right? So let's talk about how we can stop tiptoeing around people's triggers, because even in the most secure relationships, we're going to have uncomfortable feelings come up. No conflict doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is healthy, right? We are human beings. We have a lot of similarities, but we also have a lot of differences, and conflict allows us to know and get to know each other better. right? So the goal isn't to avoid them, it's to build a capacity to be with them, to be with our needs, to be with our triggers, to be with uncomfortable feelings without necessarily having to abandon ourselves. So if you're always monitoring his triggers, the problem is you risk betraying your own needs just to maintain some kind of peace or equilibrium. So instead, I'd recommend asking yourself, can I tolerate the discomfort of not knowing without abandoning myself? Can I sit with the possibility of loss if I express what it is that I want without twisting myself into somebody that I'm not? Right? So just even posing the questions is doing the work of evolving our emotional maturity because it's not about protecting ourselves from disappointment or conflict all the time. It's about stepping into relationships where we don't feel like we have to audition for love, where instead our authenticity is that gateway to intimacy. And all you can really do is show up with your good intentions, communicate your interest as honestly, as genuinely, and as tactfully as you can, right? But you cannot control his feelings or how he will respond. You can knock on the door, but he has to be the one that is willing to open it. And you also don't want to get into a relationship where you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time just to satisfy attachment anxiety, because it's not just about working hard to make things easier for him. It's also about pursuing the type of relationship and partner that becomes a refuge from having to work that hard, right? That was my biggest lesson for sure. And you know what? Give me a comment in the chat there if this sounds good to you. What if relationships didn't have to be so much work? What if instead they were a refuge from work? Just give me a yes or a thumbs up in the chat. Wouldn't that be nice? And what would that look like and feel like? What would that even look like and feel like? I'd love to know what you think, right? So to kind of wrap up this segment, we cannot force someone to meet us where they haven't yet arrived, right? But you can meet yourself right where you are, and you can do it with clarity, with self-trust, and a deep respect for your needs. And so if this second chance is meant to be, it will grow in mutual honesty and care, not in some fantasy or fearful tiptoeing, right? So I would recommend don't suppress or smother your truth just to keep them around. Make sure that you speak it, invite them in, and be willing to set a boundary if they're not ready, because it sounds like you are. And claiming that readiness for yourself, that is where your power lies, right? Once you claim it, now it has to show up in your life with this person or somebody else, right? So I hope that's helpful. Thank you, Mary Genius. I need to know this. I'm glad that resonates with you. I did have such a wonderful, intimate relationships up until the last one. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so for this question, it's two parts, and I think it might take us to the end of our call. But I think it's worthwhile slowing down because we have the second part is going to be a guided visualization practice, and I think we might get a lot out of it. So let me pull up the question. Okay. So what if your avoidant partner doesn't reciprocate your feelings? How long until the relationship falls apart? Okay. So what do you do when you have opened your heart, made room for emotional closeness and intimacy, and your partner just cannot meet you there? And maybe they care. Maybe they even say things like, I love you. But when it comes to really showing up emotionally, when it counts, there's silence, shutdown, confusion, or maybe they disappear altogether. And so that can leave us feeling unseen, lonely, confused, and unsure about whether or not we're actually holding space for growth or we're just clinging to hope. And that can spark a painful question. Well, how long do I wait before this whole thing unravels, right? So if you're someone who feels like you're doing all the emotional heavy lifting, especially in a dynamic where a partner pulls away just when things are supposed to be getting good, then in the first part of this segment, I want to talk about what's really going on there so we can reconnect to a sense of self-worth and make a clear, grounded choice about how long we are going to allow the relationship to last, right? And in the second part of the segment, I want to introduce a guided visualization so that we can tap into our own intuition and explore the timeline of your relationship. Okay. So to begin, I want to break down the question into three core concerns that are really popping up. And the first is, what is actually happening when an avoidant partner doesn't show emotional reciprocity? Secondly, what are the real consequences of emotional needs going unmet? And lastly, what choices are available to someone who might be on the receiving end of this dynamic? So to unpack these, I also have three core premises. So first, avoidant behavior, however they are demonstrating it, in this case through emotional withdrawal, doesn't necessarily mean that they don't care. It usually means that they don't know how to respond to emotional closeness or bids for emotional connection, particularly in the way that you want it, right? Secondly, emotional needs don't disappear because we have suppressed or silenced them. And while there is no, magic number or timeline, there are some signs that a relationship has begun to degrade. And thirdly, the relationship timeline is 50% within your power and control, right? So if you're feeling stalled, your readiness may have outgrown this connection, but it is your attachment anxiety that is keeping you stuck, kind of waiting for your partner to set the tone and decide the fate of the relationship. And so as a result, you're kind of giving away your power in the situation. So let's dig into this. First, remember, avoidance isn't indifference. It's typically self-protection, right? So when someone has an avoidant attachment style, they're not necessarily emotionally cold. It may just feel unsafe to them to express that level of vulnerability. So even being emotional can trigger things like shame, overwhelm, a fear of engulfment, a fear of scaring you off, right? A fear of being perceived as weak. So they will protect themselves by pulling away, not because they don't care, but because caring too much can be terrifying when you've never learned how to manage that kind of emotional energy. And we also have to acknowledge that the way you experience intimacy or closeness could just be fundamentally incompatible with the way your partner experiences it. So for instance, avoidant partners, they tend to experience closeness in things like parallel play. So doing activities side by side while without necessarily talking too much, but just enjoying each other's presence in a quiet type of intimacy with shared space. Sometimes they demonstrate it through acts of service, showing love through doing or fixing, but not necessarily getting into feelings in a verbal way. And they can utilize space as a sign of trust. So I don't need anything. This is not intended to wound you or to exclude you. For avoidant partners, sometimes needing nothing is the greatest gift they believe they could give you. They are showing their strength and security by not placing demands on you and not being a burden. And so giving you space is how they show you respect and trust, which is why they expect it in return, right? Now, on the other hand, we have anxious partners, and they're more likely to feel close with things like emotional check-ins, including consistent and frequent verbal affirmations or updates, physical closeness and cuddling, deep ongoing conversations about the relationship, a lot of time spent together in interactive activities, planning together, building things together, right? Now, both of these sets of needs are valid. It's all valid, exactly in the way you experience it. It's all valid. But if you are constantly tiptoeing around a partner or feeling like you're not getting enough of what you need and want in the relationship, the reality is you just may not be compatible. And that incompatibility is going to lead to a major gap in communication and eventually degrade the emotional connection. And that doesn't just hurt, it starts to erode trust, it starts to erode clarity, and it starts to erode mutual respect. And then you start feeling angry, resentful, and entitled, which leads me to my second point, which is that when we have these unmet needs, it turns into resentment. So again, there's no magic timeline for when a relationship will start to fall apart. But when we have emotional needs that are going unmet or ignored, or that are just simply incompatible with the relationship container, there are some signs that the relationship has begun to degrade. So for example, you're going to feel more emotionally alone with them than without them. Conversations stay on a surface level and tend to avoid any kind of vulnerability. You start censoring yourself to avoid pushing them away. Repairing after a conflict comes less frequently or it's less sincere, as if they're just paying lip service. You might start to second guess your worth based on their level of attention, approval, or validation. And you might feel more anxious after connecting with them than you do feel as if you've been reassured or soothed. So, what happens? Well, the relationship might explode or implode overnight, or it could start to slowly dissolve through increasing distance, disconnection, and unspoken resentment. And I would say the second is often more painful because sometimes you can feel like you're grieving a relationship that is still technically there. So you want to ask yourself, do I feel more lonely with them than I do alone? Do I feel safe, clearly expressing what I need? Are they responsive, even imperfectly, or are they just reactive or retreating? So if you're the only one trying to close that emotional gap, then the imbalance becomes its own kind of heartbreak, right? And that leads me to the third point, which is you may have just outgrown this connection. So I say the timeline is 50% within your power and control because a relationship that really works only works when both people are participating. And I use 50% as just a sort of placeholder. It's not always 50%. Sometimes you're doing 70, they're doing 30. Sometimes they're doing 70, you're doing 30. But the idea is that over time, it balances itself out. You're supporting each other. You're equally invested in the relationship. It matters to you. And you've adopted your partner's thoughts, feelings, and needs as equally as important, as being equally as important as your own, because you cannot carry both sides of that connection entirely. And if one person stalls or pulls away or disengages, you are still going to have the power to choose what you're going to do next, even if they are indecisive, right? So your readiness is the part of you that has matured beyond these old wounds that may be stimulating that attachment anxiety or those patterns of shrinking ourselves to make it work, right? That readiness is that wise, intuitive, spiritual aspect of yourself, the part of you that can hold a broader, more expansive, what I call moon's eye view for love that is rooted in reciprocity instead of anxiety. So this part of you, I believe, already knows what's possible, even if your nervous system doesn't fully comprehend or believe it yet. And so you're going to know that you've outgrown that connection when you feel more constrained than supported, when that connection brings confusion instead of clarity, and when you are doing more emotional labor than you are emotional receiving. And our attachment anxiety can really keep us stuck because it's operating under this belief that, well, if I let this go, then maybe I'll I'll lose my best chance at love. But remember, that belief comes from a much younger version of you, usually an inner child part that once felt abandoned and is seeking safety by staying with this person at all costs. It believes it's a survival concern. But you don't need to be rescued anymore. You just need to be reunited with your own self-trust, with the spiritual aspect of you. Because a love that requires you to abandon yourself, that's not really the kind of reciprocal love that is going to help you to grow and expand. It's really more of a reenactment. And you are allowed to let go of and stop repeating that kind of wounded pattern in your life. So let me know in the chat or the comments if this sounds familiar. Has anybody here ever hung on too long, wondering if this person that you're seeing will finally ever meet you where you're at? Or maybe you told yourself that their silence wasn't a no, it was just a maybe, even though there was a lot of evidence to suggest otherwise, right? Has anyone ever experienced that? Just give me a yes or a thumbs up in the chat. And I'd love to know, what did you learn from that experience? What were the lessons that you walked away with? I'd love to know that. So we'll bring this segment to a close and we'll move on to part two. And let's revisit the question. What if your avoidant partner doesn't reciprocate your feelings? How long before the relationship falls apart? Well, in a nutshell, that's really within your power to decide. Yes, it's true. Just because your avoidant partner doesn't reciprocate the way that you feel doesn't mean that they don't care to the fullest of the capacity of what they feel. But if waiting for your partner to decide the fate of the relationship means that you have needs that are going unmet, that is going to breed resentment over time. And how long you choose to simmer in that resentment is entirely within your control. And that doesn't mean that you have to throw your arms up and walk away in anger. Instead, I'd have you think of it as walking towards yourself with clarity. So be willing to say, I'm no longer going to suppress my emotional needs to match somebody else's limitations. And again, that doesn't mean you have to immediately end it. That might mean that you offer challenging invitations for them to grow with you for a period of time. And then you give them a little leeway and the choice to accept or deny your invitation. But if they start to drift further away, if no grand explanation comes, there is power in finally seeing what is truly real and possible for you with this person without trying to shrink yourself or meet their standards. Because it sounds like for this inquirer, they're not just looking for love, they're looking for a connection that is mutual, meaningful, and emotionally safe. And that's not a fantasy. It is a reflection of how far you've come. So if you like the sound of that, but you're not sure what the next step should be, stick with me for the second part of this segment, because I'd like to do a guided visualization next to explore your heart's intuition on the matter. Okay, so let's dive into the second segment. And I invite you to find a quiet spot if you can. And when we're done with this segment, I'll make sure to address the questions and comments in the chat. But I want to make sure we get our practice in first. Okay. So let's anchor into this guided visualization with our student's question one more time. What if your avoidant partner doesn't reciprocate your feelings? How long until it falls apart? So rather than try to figure this out intellectually, let's explore our own intuitive wisdom because it's likely, I believe, that your spirit knows the answer already. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and take a deep breath. You might try breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Turning your attention inwards, noticing that with every breath, there is an opening up of your lungs, an opening up of your ribs, an opening up of your heart. There is, in fact, a spaciousness that exists and grows inside of you. And I want you to attend to the surface beneath you, the chair, the couch, the floor you might be sitting on, the bed you might be lying on. Just noticing the contact between whatever holds you and your body. And I'd like you to just draw your awareness to your third eye, which is that spot between your brow and the center of your brow, between your eyes and the center of your brow, where we retain the capacity to vision and to visualize, where wisdom is formed through experience and higher consciousness. And I'd like you to imagine in your mind's eye a timeline of your current relationship. And it stretches out in front of you like a glowing thread, illuminated with both moments of connection and perhaps moments of confusion. And so we're going to begin at the beginning of this thread, the start of your relationship. And notice its color, its texture, and any subtleties. Remember how it felt when that connection began. The spark, the possibility, the hopes you had, the fantasies. Just let yourself feel what was true for you then. And if you're not in a relationship now, maybe this is a past relationship you're still trying to make sense of. It's all correct. Now I invite you to walk forward following this thread. And notice where things began to shift. Where did the warmth begin to cool? Where did emotional needs start to go unanswered, unspoken, or unacknowledged? Remembering to breathe, just witnessing these touch points, these milestones along the thread of your relationship. And now find yourself arriving here in this moment. Right now, in the present moment. What is the quality of the thread here and now? What is the color of its illumination? Is it brightly lit or is it dim? Is it thick or is it thin? Is it loose or tight with tension? And taking a breath in, acknowledging that witnessing, noticing how does your body respond? Is it constricted? Is it relaxed? Relieved? Heavy with hope? And just take a moment to tune into what your body has to say about this thread and this present moment here and now. And now we're going to continue forward. And you'll notice up ahead that the thread splits in two. There is a clear fork in the road, two distinct paths. And this is a moment of possibility, a moment of growth, and maybe even a moment of power. And so the left path is familiar. It's going to represent staying the course without any significant change. And the right path is going to glow differently. It represents choosing self-alignment, even if you are confused or uncertain. And you get to explore both. So first, we're going to turn down the left path. And this is to continue walking on the current path, exactly as things are. So there are no new boundaries, no deeper conversations, no demands, but there is hope. So follow this timeline, moving forward in time, stepping into the near future, let's say 6 months into the future. What do you notice? Are you more fulfilled or are you fatigued? Are you more connected or have you become more invisible? What have you had to give up in order to stay? Now advance another 6 months, 1 year from now. What do you see? What do you know? Just let yourself pause and feel that. There's no judgment. We're just witnessing the cost of doing nothing. Or maybe the benefits. Maybe Spirit has shown you something unexpected. Maybe releasing the effort is what's needed to make this relationship work. Who knows? Very good. So I invite you to take a breath and release it with a sigh, letting the left side of the path go for now. And we're going to return to the fork. Now this time we're going to turn right. And we're going to step onto the path of honoring your own clarity. And this is a timeline where you don't wait for the other person to change. You don't wait for explanations. You don't ask for closure. Instead, you speak your truth. You set clear emotional boundaries. And you're acting from a place of self-trust, self-respect, and self-advocacy, not fear. And so now let yourself walk forward on this new thread, this new path. Observe its color and illumination, its subtleties, its thickness, its thinness. What's different? How are you different? How might your partner respond to you? Are there any new kinds of relationships surrounding you? What does it feel like to be that deeply rooted and grounded in your self-sovereignty? And continue following the path in the thread to 6 months from now. What does that look like? And you continue again for another 6 months, 1 year from now. What has changed? And as we come to the end of 1 year, I'd like you to envision this future version of you, the one standing 1 year down this aligned path, turns around and looks at you lovingly. And they place a hand on your heart They look you in the eye and they give you a piece of guidance they want you to know and remember. What does this future version of you want you to know and remember? And just breathe it in and let it land in the heart. And take another breath in, perhaps deeper than the last. Imagining that, witnessing that knowledge, that guidance from your own higher future self. Sink in almost as if it is a fragrance. Sinking in through the bloodstream, pumping to the rhythm of your heartbeat from your crown to your toes, from your fingertips to your nose, just allowing that to become a form of cell memory and body knowledge. And knowing and trusting that even if the guidance isn't clear to you now, over time, deeper wisdoms will rise to your conscious mind and awareness. And when and if action is required, you will know what to do. And so you can take another breath in, and on the exhale, just imagine releasing that practice, letting the threads dissolve for now, anchoring in the wisdom you gained into the heart, into the mind, into the body. And I'm going to count backwards from 5 to 1, and we'll release the practice in full. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so as you start to come back into this present moment, there's a few process questions I would offer you. How did it feel to stay on the same path, the left side? What did you witness about that? And then, of course, how did it feel to walk the right path, the right side? What did your future self want to show you? What guidance did they offer? And if there were one action step you could take today to choose clarity over confusion, what would that look like? What would that be? And so I would close this segment just by saying that you don't need to rush into a decision about anything today. But now that you've seen where these paths lead with the guidance and wisdom of your own intuitive self, I hope you realize that you're not powerless. You're not waiting, but you are choosing, not necessarily a partner, but a path to walk. And I believe that the path that brings you peace, clarity, and dignity is one that your future self has already traveled. There's already a version of you that is walking that path right now. And so when the wisdom comes through in this way, I would advise you to trust it. So I hope that you enjoyed that exercise. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections in the chat before we close. This was the most amazing and helpful meditation ever. I'm glad that was helpful, Mary. Thank you for sharing. A real eye opener. Yeah. I mean, we know so much. We know more than we think we know. And I just want to review some of our comments. The last 15 years of my 35-year marriage has been behaviors like this. The previous 20 were a dance. With his never showing interest in me, never wanting to do anything with us unless it's his interest, never doing what he promised. I've stopped enabling, fawning, and apologizing. I separated from him last year, but we're still stuck in the same house with my daughter who is chasing his love and interest. Hmm. And he insists I'm the problem. Yeah, those are difficult situations to be in, sure. I have to wait 2 years for this person to actually become an adult. So then you get to feel into, is that aligned with your path? Is 2 years agreeable to you or not? I'm still marveling about my endurance, probably a protector at work. Thank you for sharing that. The answer to that was so big, inspired an entire transformation process for me that has resulted in so many deep and spiritual changes. That's beautiful, including buying your course. I realized I could never live my life that way again. Wow, what a wonderful turning point. I was saving and protecting everyone. Yeah, really helpful. I'm glad that was helpful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me here in the live space. I so appreciate you and your participation. And we will be back on the third Thursday of the month with more questions. And again, if you have questions you'd like to submit in advance, you can do so through your student dashboard, either in the introductory module of your course or under the live events and replays module. So thank you, everyone. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week, and I look forward to seeing you again on our next call.